You know, we often think of science and spirituality as two totally separate things, right? But what if that line is, well, way blurrier than we ever imagined? Today, drawing from the work of Michael Matthews, we're diving into a concept called the quantum kingdom.
So let's just jump right in with the big central question from our source material. What if the frontiers of modern science and the wisdom of ancient scripture are actually telling the exact same story, just using different languages?
We're going to explore a really fascinating argument that tries to build a bridge between three worlds that seem miles apart. The super weird rules of quantum physics, the complex wiring of our brains, and of course, the profound nature of spiritual experience.
So where does this connection even begin? Well, according to the source, it all starts right here, inside our own heads, with the pretty radical idea that the human brain is basically a quantum computer. And that, of course, leads to a massive question. Could consciousness itself be a quantum phenomenon?
Now, this isn't just a philosophical idea. The source actually points to a real scientific framework for this. It's a theory called orchestrated objective reduction, or ORC-OR for short. It was put forward by Dr. Stuart Hameroff and the legendary Sir Roger Penrose. And basically, it proposes that deep inside our neurons, in these tiny little structures called microtubules, quantum events are happening all the time. And that, the theory says, is where consciousness literally comes.
And the scale we're talking about here, it is just absolutely mind-boggling. The source points out that our brains have something like 860 trillion synaptic connections. To give you some perspective, that kind of processing power makes even our most advanced supercomputers look like a pocket calculator. The argument is that the hardware for this incredible quantum experience is already built into every single one of us.
But here's the thing. It's not just about the hardware we're born with. The source argues that we can actively, physically change our brain's architecture. We can rewire our reality, and that spiritual practice is one of the key ways to do it.
And this is where it gets really interesting. Using neuroimaging, scientists have found what they call the default mode network, or DMN. You can kind of think of it as the brain's headquarters for your sense of self, the ego. The source highlights research showing that during deep meditation or profound spiritual moments, activity in this network gets really quiet. It's like the ego goes offline, and that neurological shift seems to directly correlate with those feelings of oneness and connection to something way bigger than ourselves. So how does this rewiring actually happen? Well, the key mechanism here is something called neuroplasticity. It's this incredible, almost superpower-like ability of the brain to physically change and reorganize itself based on what we experience and where we put our attention. It's not a static organ at all. It's alive and constantly adapting. The source actually frames this as upgrading your consciousness hardware. For example, it suggests that meditation can physically increase gray matter in the brain. Prayer can strengthen the neural pathways for hope, and worship can light up our reward centers. The main point here is that this isn't just a nice metaphor. It's presented as a literal, physical restructuring of your brain.
Okay, so we've been looking inside the brain, but now we're going to zoom out, way out. What if consciousness isn't actually trapped inside our skulls? The next part of the argument takes us into this idea of an entangled universe.
To do this, the source brings up quantum entanglement, what Einstein famously called spooky action at a distance. It's this wild idea that two particles can become linked in such a way that what happens to one instantly, and I mean instantly, affects the other, even if they're on opposite sides of the universe. So the source uses this to ask a huge question. What if consciousness works the same way? What if it's also non-local, part of some vast interconnected field that goes beyond space and time?
And boom, this is where the source draws a direct line from that cutting-edge science right back to scripture. It puts the idea of an unseen, connected reality side by side with this verse from Hebrews, suggesting that maybe, just maybe, ancient texts were describing quantum principles long before we had the scientific words for them.
All right, one of the most powerful metaphors used in this whole body of work is the idea of frequency. It suggests that consciousness operates on different wavelengths, and that we can actually learn how to tune our own personal receiver.
And to get a sense of this, just look at the electromagnetic spectrum. The light we can actually see, it's a ridiculously tiny sliver of reality. We're talking about 0.0035% of the whole thing. So the source asks, what if our normal, everyday consciousness is just as limited? What if there's this vast spectrum of reality out there that we're just not tuned into yet?
So this all leads to what the source calls a human emotion scale,
which connects our feelings to measurable energy frequencies. Down at the bottom, you have these low-frequency emotions like shame and fear. And all the way at the top, you find these incredibly high-frequency states like love, joy, and what it calls enlightenment. The core idea here is that our emotional state is literally a vibration we are broadcasting out into the universe.
And that frequency doesn't just stay locked inside of you. The source talks about something called a biofield, an energy field that it claims is generated by your emotions and extends about 2.5 to 3 feet out from your body. This is put forward as a possible mechanism for how our internal state could tangibly, physically affect the world and the people around us. So, where is all of this heading? Well, the final section of the source material really takes a quantum leap into the future, exploring what it calls consciousness technology. A great way to think about it is this metaphor of an internet of consciousness. In this model, our individual minds are basically smartphones. Those spiritual practices we've been talking about, that's you improving your Wi-Fi signal. And ultimately, the goal is to connect to a universal consciousness cloud.
And this is where it starts to sound like something straight out of science fiction. The source imagines a future with some truly revolutionary tech. I mean, think about neural interfaces that could let us have shared spiritual experiences, or personalized spiritual guidance based on your unique brain patterns. It even suggests that AI could one day help us access what it calls divine dimensions of wisdom.
So when you put it all together, the crucial point the source builds towards is this. The kingdom of heaven isn't some far-off place you go to when you die. It's described as a present reality, a dimension of consciousness that is accessible to us right here, right now.
And that brings us to the final, really provocative question that the source material leaves us with. After all this speculation about future tech, neural interfaces, and AI, what if we discover that the most powerful, most advanced technology in the entire universe has been inside of us this whole time, is the ultimate technology, consciousness itself?